Hello again, everyone. Hopefully you all are feeling pretty good coming off of that second exam on Chapter 3, because now we're moving on into Chapter 4, where we're going to be talking about some slightly different things with what are called exponential and logarithmic functions, where in particular there are two really vital ones that we're going to get to in time, especially in this week. In 4.1, we're starting with an introduction to what are called exponential functions. So we're getting the very basic definition, talking about some applications for how we use them, how we graph them. I know you hear the word graph and some of you get a little bit nervous. Don't worry too much about that. We'll get some details there, but it's not quite as intense as it might sound, as it might seem. Then we get some of the basic properties, basic characteristics there in terms of things like domains and ranges and what happens when we transform a exponential function. And then we'll talk about a few very, very special kinds in the context of a thing called compounding interest rates, and eventually the natural exponential function, where don't get too caught up on that word natural, meaning that you have to understand it immediately. It's an odd thing, but a very important one. Then in 4.2, we're going to talk about the reverse of an exponential function, a logarithmic function, where I'm going to say it now and I'll say it again later. A logarithmic function is just the inverse of a exponential. So we get a lot of free properties that work in exactly the way you might expect an inverse to work, except it comes from exponential, and maybe you don't quite have exponentials just yet, so I might be a little bit ahead of myself, but we'll get there. So we talk about things like graphs and basic properties and some of the characteristics we can see here, where we're going to have more stuff with the properties in 4.3. We're just going to get some of the most standard things here, and then we'll finish with some talk on two very important kinds of logarithms: the common logarithm, which is the old school main one, and the natural logarithm, which is the more modern main one that we do basically everything in terms of logarithms with. But hey, I'm getting ahead of myself again. So for this week, we have a worksheet, more practice with this stuff, and we're going to need practice with these because even if you do know them pretty well, they are weird. They're very different from what you're likely used to. They're certainly very different from polynomials. And with that, we also have homework that's due next week and a pre-assessment to move us towards the back half of Chapter 4. It's another quick one in here, even though we've got some important stuff. But anyway, those are all things for people to worry about who aren't here right now. And for those of you that are here watching this, you're probably interested in moving on to section 4.1. So let's get on in there.